Good evening, and thank you for being here with us today. Actually, it's a quite special event for us, kind of opening celebration, but frustrated, as you can imagine, for the coronavirus, and the impossibility of sharing this moment with you, with all of you physically. But anyway, the thing is that Scala, the new installation system that we had just opened 1 month ago, is something really physical, even if we are talking about a sound installation. And now I will try to explain very, very briefly what kind of proposal is Scala. Scala is a new installation that occupies the building's main staircase of Tabakalera. It intends to explore the countless languages and means of approaching music and sound by generating new and unexpected interactions between the sonic pieces and architectural space used by a mobile public. Scala used the 3 floors of Tabakalera's central staircase to represent the harmonic division of the audible spectrum into deep, middle, and high-pitched tones. Using this physical correspondence, the project incorporates historical works and new productions, which will be rotated on a 4-monthly basis. Scala is an invitation to go deeper into musical and extra-musical relationships, into what we hear and don't hear, and into the exchange that happens between sound and sense, and between the human and the mechanical. Okay, this is the general framework of the conversation that will happen in a moment. The second layer is about Pauline Oliveros, because we are opening Scala with sound patterns, piece for choir that she composed in 1961. And the idea for this conversation is to understand who was Pauline Oliveros, what makes this person so special and important to all of us who are interested in music, listening, and sound art. And for this reason, we are here with Jane Alden. Because a part of being a fabulous musicologist and performer, in 2011, she formed Vocal Constructivists. And the version of some patterns that we are presenting in Scala is a version of them. So, Jane, good evening. It has been a pleasure to talk all these weeks working on Scala and exchanging perspective and knowledge about Pauline Oliveros with you. And I hope we can continue on this path. And yes, thank you very much for everything. And good evening.
Thank you, Oier, for that very kind introduction. It's wonderful to have a chance to talk to you this afternoon here in Connecticut, this evening in Spain, about someone who even now, or perhaps especially now, many of us are turning to for inspiration. In November of this year, it will be 5 years since the death of Pauline Oliveros, or as her friend, the mystical Laraji, put it, since Pauline passed into the greater consciousness. But her legacy continues to reverberate and indeed amplify. The subject of several dissertations, Oliveros was a regular visitor to Wesleyan, where I work, on account of her friendships and collaborations with Anthony Braxton, Neely Bruce, Ron Quiveler, Alvin Lucier, Paula Mathuson, and my London-based group, the Vocal Constructivists. Indeed, Wesleyan indirectly helped Oliveros to publish her sonic meditations, as Alvin Lucier asked her to include them in the issue of Source magazine that he edited. Neely Bruce and the Wesleyan Singers commissioned her Rose Moon, which I believe you can see now in slide 1. The beautiful mandala form appeared in many of Oliveros's works. In the process of performing the ceremony of this piece, which you can see now In the second slide, you see the Wesleyan students, Neely Bruce in the middle and Oliveros walking the mandala. The names of the moon were chanted, as well as the names of people they might wish to remember. So this piece seems an appropriate beginning for our commemorative discussion. The vocal constructivists were fortunate enough to work with Oliveros when they came to Wesleyan for a notation festival I curated in 2013. This led to our first performance of sound patterns and inspired the vocal constructivists to perform more Oliveros in 2016 as part of a deep minimalism festival in London. The graphic score of Lullaby for Daisy Pauline, which you can see now in the next slide, is presented like Rose Moon in the form of a circle. The vocal constructivists performed it standing in a circle that slowly expanded in St. John Smith Square, which is the venue you see in the next slide. That concert in June 2016 was the day the result of the Brexit referendum was announced. My group, like the country, included those who had voted to leave and those who wanted to remain in the EU. What was so extraordinary was to see the way Oliveros not only transcended such divisions, but managed to find a way to bring everyone together with the simple invitation to join her in a tuning meditation. The space was transformed as the entire audience set aside their personal differences and tuned into one another, one breath at a time. Pauline's death on Thanksgiving Day later that year moved the vocal constructivists to give commemorative concerts in 4 different venues over the next 2 years, interspersing new pieces written in her honour with pieces by Pauline.
Thank you, Jane. I'm doing very simple questions, like you can go deeper in this question of who was Pauline Oliveros and why is so important her legacy for the music, but also for art, art of listening in general.
Pauline Oliveros was born in 1932 and died in 2016. She was an American composer, performer, martial arts practitioner, and humanitarian. A rare woman among the predominantly male cohort of American composers born in the 1930s, Oliveros was a pioneer of electronics, of noise, alternate tuning systems, meditative music, contemporary accordion playing, music making for all physical abilities, telematic music, and multimedia events. She explored attention strategies, focal attention within ourselves and global attention to the world, and she explored improvisation, which she saw as a key part of the human experience. Oliveros played an important role in the development of a range of contemporary musical practices: tape music, electronic processing, sonic meditation, deep listening, drones, and extended instrumentation. For her 21st birthday, her mother gave her a reel-to-reel tape recorder. Oliveros put a microphone outside her window and hit record. When she played the tape back, she was surprised to discover how many sounds were on it that she did not remember hearing. The experience planted the seed of what Pauline later called deep listening. From that moment, I determined that I must expand my awareness of the entire sound field, she later wrote. I gave myself the seeming impossible task of listening to everything all the time. Oliveros composed a series of haunting electronic pieces that make use of analog electronics and tape delay systems. This exploration of electronic sounds was fundamental to the late 1950s and early 60s. Her first tape piece was an ambitious 4-channel work called Time Perspectives, made by recording small sounds from objects resonated on a wooden wall with changing tape speed. She used cardboard tubes as filters, the wall to resonate, and her bathtub as a reverberation chamber. Sections of the piece were improvised and then subjected to speed changes. Her sound sources were her voice, a pair of soup ladles with handles removed, and a table knife. We'll listen now to part of Time Perspectives, and you can see now in the slide the album on which this was released.
Okay.
Rather than cutting and splicing small pieces of tape together, Oliveros used 2 tape machines with the tape running across both machines to make a delay system. Also on this album is the track 5 of 4, a piece she made in 1966, which structures sound as noise using a larger array of oscillators, a patch bay, line amplifier, and 2 tape recorders. It is also a pun on a secondary dominant, 5 of the subdominant. Pauline loved puns. Perhaps her most influential achievement was her pioneering of deep listening, a discipline designed to open our minds and thereby our imaginations. This attention to deep listening was itself a pun on the venue where she first started this kind of music making, deep underground. In 1988, Pauline, Stuart Dempster, and Panayotis climbed with their instruments down a 14-foot ladder into a former water cistern in Washington state that had 89 pillars, was made of reinforced concrete, and had a 45-second reverb time. From the Deep Listening album, which you can see in the slide now, this was recorded in the cistern, we're going to listen to part of Zituen, which features Oliveros' voice and whistling, Panayotis playing a garden hose, and Dempster's voice. Let's listen now to a brief excerpt of it. The pun of deep listening has blossomed into an aesthetic based upon principles of improvisation and electronic music, ritual, teaching, and meditation. It continues to inspire both trained and untrained performers to practice the art of listening and responding to environmental conditions in solo and ensemble situations. Oliveros held the first deep listening retreat in 1991 in the mountains of New Mexico. Perhaps the most radical aspect of deep listening has been its application to the hard of hearing and the deaf. Oliveros worked on sensational sounds for hearing and non-hearing performers in Norway with deaf performers, who she invited to teach musicians from the Norwegian Philharmonic how to perceive and play newly commissioned instruments. One of the deaf musicians conducted the piece to an audience of 600 people in the former Central Badet, the municipal swimming pool. Most of the instruments were set up in the deep end of the pool, as would be appropriate for deep listening.
Okay, Jane, thank you. But the history of art, and especially when someone achieves a certain success, tends to present the artist in an isolated way, no? But which were the context in which Pauline moved? Which were her sources and which were her friends and traveling companions?
Well, Oliveros was born in Texas. Her mother and grandmother taught piano, but she wasn't quite as interested in classical harmony, melody, and counterpoint as she was in the esoteric qualities of sound itself. Her accordion teacher taught her to hear combination tones, very low undertones, which sound faintly when two notes are played loudly. Oliveros immediately wanted to eliminate the fundamental tones so she could hear only the undertones. More than a decade later, she figured out how to do exactly that, using signal generators in an electronic studio. I felt like a witch capturing sounds from another realm, she later said. Oliveros studied composition at the University of Houston from 1949, at San Francisco State College from 1954, and privately with Robert Erickson. While in San Francisco, Oliveros became friends with the Spanish-born Raymond Sender, Morton Subotnick, Terry Riley, Lauren Rush, and later Lamont Young. Terry, Lauren, and Pauline formed one of the very first free improvisation groups. The story goes that Terry had to write a film score and didn't have time to write it, so the three went into a studio at Radio KPFA, where Lauren had access to an Ampex tape machine. He played koto and percussion, Terry piano, and Pauline the French horn. They improvised, listened, and played spontaneously. Terry used one of those improvised tracks for the film, and the three continued improvising when they could. A founding member of the San Francisco Tape Music Center in the early 1960s, Oliveros served as its first director when it moved to Mills College from 1966 to 1967. This was one of the first electronic music studios in the United States. Oliveros was very attached to the sound of tube oscillators. When Don Buchler demonstrated his 100 series modular synthesizer, the Buchler Box, at the San Francisco Tape Music Center in December 1965, Oliveros headed immediately upstairs and made Bye Bye Butterfly. She set two Hewlett-Packard oscillators above the range of hearing, around 40,000 Hertz, and patched in a couple of line amplifiers to make audible the different tones. She added a tape delay system playing the oscillators by barely turning the dials, listening intently, and improvising through the composition in real time, taking a tone and microscopically varying it. Wanting to use a record as a sound source, she patched a phonograph into her performance system and dropped the needle onto an aria from Puccini's Madame Butterfly. This makes the piece a kind of remixed deconstruction of Puccini's Madame Butterfly, made without a mixer. There were no mixers in the studio then. We'll listen now to part of Pauline Oliveros's Bye Bye Butterfly. Bye Bye Butterfly was described by John Rockwell as one of the most significant works of the 1960s. In spite of the serendipitous choice of this record, the track was later understood to bid, and I quote Pauline here, farewell not only to the music of the 19th century, but also to the system of polite morality of that age and its attendant institutionalized oppression of the female sex. Struck by the way Oliveros's high pure tone is alternately steady and varying in pitch, reminiscent of an old radio tuning in a faraway station, the vocal constructivists started to wonder what it would mean to tune into this piece 50 years later, in 2017. We made the decision to introduce to the piece two live accordion players and a solo singer, as well as the rest of the group as a chorus. And we're going to play now part of the audio from the concert that we did in March 2017 in Café Otto. At Mills, Oliveros combined her idiosyncratic tape techniques with the Buchla modular synthesizer and developed what was to become the expanded instrument system, an improvisational environment that she used for solo performances and with the later Deep Listening Band. In 1967, Oliveros was invited to establish the electronic music program for graduate students at UCSD, that's the University of California in San Diego, where she remained until 1981. UCSD was open for experimentation. In addition to electronic music courses, she taught The Nature of Music, a large service course that included making tape pieces by cut and splice editing from pre-recorded sounds, group improvisation and found instruments, and graphic scoring. Thereafter, she moved east to become consulting director of the Creative Music Foundation, also known as the Creative Music Studio, in Woodstock, New York. Oliveros later taught at Oberlin College and at Rensselaer Polytechnic in upstate New York. Over the 6 decades of her professional career, Oliveros rarely received the accolades afforded to the male composers of her generation, notwithstanding the distinction of an extraordinarily wide and distinguished roster of collaborators, including figures like DJ Spooky and Cecil Taylor, and extensive public recognition. Among Pauline's many achievements were winning the Gare Armas Composition Prize in 1962 for sound patterns, representing the US at the World Fair in Osaka, Japan in the 1970s, being honored with a retrospective at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C. in the 1980s, receiving a letter of distinction from the American Music Center in the 1990s, winning the John Cage Award in 2012 of the Foundation for Contemporary Arts, the Gigahertz Prize from ZKM Karlsruhe for Lifetime Achievement in Electronic Music, the Resounding Vision Award for Lifetime Achievement from Nameless Sound in Houston, and honorary membership of the Society for American Music. Sound Patterns, from 1961, was constructed of phonetic sounds chosen on the basis of their timbre, possibly reflecting Oliveros's then nascent interest in electronic music. It can be grouped into 4 categories: white noise, the consonants sh, s, z, p, t, h, kt, d, ch, th, k, and s. Ring modulated sounds, which I won't demonstrate, rapidly changing vowel content, percussive envelopes, lip pops, tongue clicks, finger snaps, and flutter lips, and filter techniques, muting by covering the mouth with a hand, humming, or singing through clenched teeth. Sound Patterns predates similar compositions by Georgie Ligeti, Aventure from 1962 and Nouvelle Aventure from 1962 to 65, and Karl-Heinz Stockhausen's Moment from 1962 to 4. We're going to listen now to part of Sound Patterns from the recording that I made with the Vocal Constructivists on the album Walking Still, which we released in 2014. Throughout her career, Oliveros actively advocated for the recognition of women composers, both in her writings and through the Pauline Oliveros Foundation and the Deep Listening Institute. She made waves in 1970 with a New York Times editorial, "And don't call them lady composers," that elaborated on her lifelong commitment to equality for women in music and in the world. She corresponded with Jill Johnston, Judy Chicago, Kate Millett, and other leading feminist writers and artists. In 1971, in Sources magazine, she described herself as follows: Pauline Oliveros is a two-legged human being, a female, lesbian, musician, composer, among other things that contribute to her identity. She is herself and lives with her partner, along with assorted poultry, dogs, cats, rabbits, and tropical hermit crabs. She is devoted to the elevation and equalization of the feminine principle along with the masculine principle. The feminine principle is subjugated in both women and men, personally and transpersonally. She believes that Sappho, the great Greek poetess, was the archetype of women composers, and that the destruction of her work by the early Christians is representative of a movement which eliminated and suppressed all models of women as creators in the arts. She is further devoted to uncovering, establishing, and encouraging new models to which women and the feminine side of men can relate. You can imagine the impact of a statement like that, particularly in 1971. This was around the time that Oliveros embarked with Alison Knowles on a project called Postcard Theatre. They produced a series of postcards that reframed male composers using female epithets and sent them to friends as a way of drawing attention to the marginal status of women in music. And you can see the postcards in the slide here. Oliveros frowns in concentration as she reads a book in her garden with, I hope you can see, a brooding papier-mâché bust of Beethoven in the background. Weaponizing the vocabulary of gendered denigrations, Oliveros and Knowles used the implausible to open up the possibility of an alternative history, one that might acknowledge the story of women's endeavours. In feminizing or queering compositional possibility, they also placed themselves in this arena. The idea was to take photos of women composers and to attach texts describing each classical male composer with the kind of derogatory comment they felt women composers were all too frequently dismissed with. Her use of wit and her commitment to healing may have played a part in ensuring that Oliveros's transformative legacy has not been dismissed. Instead, her works were played on many radio stations following her death, including a 20-hour broadcast at Columbia University, and tribute concerts took place throughout the world. There seems to be recognition that someone who got marathon runners with noisemakers to jog the perimeters of giant mandalas, someone who spearheaded technologies to help children with severe physical or cognitive disabilities to improvise, and who managed to conduct thousands of women at the Michigan Women's Music Festival in a tuning meditation, really could offer hope. Perhaps we might try a new sound meditation now, while this year is still new. So you should be able to see this in the slide. I'll just give you a minute to look at that, and perhaps I can just talk you through it. So you listen, and then during any breath, you take a breath, and then you make a sound. And then you breathe again, and then you listen outwardly for another sound. Always breathing. Every alternate instruction is to breathe. You then make exactly the sound that you hear elsewhere, perhaps that someone else has made. You listen inwardly and make a sound that no one else has made. And then you continue this cycle, as she says, until there are no more sounds. That's a typical Oliveros type way of allowing the magic of timing to make itself work.
Actually, my question is very close, very related to this practice that she was doing, and it's the history of art, no, of the last century, but not only the history of art, even also for the history of philosophy or literature, was a constant for criticizing and trying to widen the narrow margins that Western rationalism left to the imagination, no? And at a certain point, perhaps a generation before Oliveros, I think, many poets, musicians, and artists began to look to the East as a source of inspiration, to question a vision of the world that no longer satisfies their spiritual needs, so to speak. How did Pauline make this journey to the East? How did it influence her exercise in attention, especially?
Pauline Oliveros embraced all spaces on Earth and beyond, seeking to help women gain access to spaces that were previously forbidden or inaccessible. Her journey beyond Western art music took her into world music, Native American culture, expanded instrumentation, just intonation, improvisation, and meditation. In 1970, she began composing sonic meditations, and you can see the title of the later publication here in the slide. These studied the structure of human consciousness. She facilitated a women's group that met at her house once a week. They did body and dream work together, along with improvisations and sonic meditations. The introduction, which you can see in the next slide, explains that each sonic meditation is a special procedure for the following. Number 1, actually making sounds. Number 2, actively imagining sounds. Number 3, listening to present sounds. And number 4, remembering sounds. Immediately after Oliveros notes, and I quote, "Because of the special procedures involved, Most all of the meditations are available to anyone who wishes to participate, regardless or in spite of musical training. All that is required is a willing commitment to the given conditions. She encouraged what she called auditory fantasy and sharing with the rest of the group what was heard inwardly. The sonic meditations helped Oliveros to find a way into how the mind works to make music. Electronic music had expanded her. The electricity in her body seemed to be flowing differently than before her exposure to electronic sound. Oliveros sought to share her meditative listening experiences with others. These text scores were not intended primarily for concert performance, but as group work to cultivate positive energy. Although she did not coin the term deep listening until a while later, the sonic meditations attest to her lifetime of listening, and I quote from rather a justly famous one. "Take a walk at night. Walk so silently that the bottoms of your feet become ears." Oliveros was inspired to send sound to the moon after watching the first lunar landing in 1969. She wrote that, quote, "It would be interesting and poetic for people to experience an installation where they could send the sound of their voices to the moon and become vocal astronauts." The ham radio operator Dave Ollian, who had participated in the moon bounce project in the 1960s, helped Oliveros to send the sound of her voice to the moon. She had her first lunar communication in 1987. Ollian had an array of Yagi antennae. Oliveros described the moment after sending her first hello moonward as follows, and I quote, "I stepped on a foot switch to change the antenna from sending to receiving mode, and in 2.5 seconds heard the return hello from the moon." The sound shifted slightly downward in pitch, a Doppler effect caused by the motion of the moon moving relative to the Earth, like the whistle of a train as it rushes past. I then played a duo with the moon using a tin whistle, accordion, and a conch shell. In her piece, Echoes from the Moon, presented 4 times between 1987 and 1999, Oliveros treats the moon as an instrument, but also as a co-performer. By communicating with the moon's echoes, Oliveros is able to convey a sense of closeness, and I want to recognize my student Devani Haruta for observing this. Oliveros' first public moon bounce performance was in 1996 during a lunar eclipse, and I quote, "The night was clear and the moon emerged above the trees in an orange mist. As she climbed the sky, her bright sliver emerged slowly from the black shadow, crystal clear. The moon was performing well for all to see, and now we were ready to sound the moon." Oliveros' use of the feminine pronoun for the moon is archaicizing, evoking the long history of mythology around the moon. With ease, Oliveros evokes goddess culture, romanticism, and feminism, all in the same breath. Also tangible is her awe at the wonder of nature and what lies beyond, matched only by her fascination with technology. The antennae enabled Oliveros to communicate with the moon, showing us that it is close enough to be reached with a whisper.
As you already mentioned, Jane, Oliveros spent his childhood in Texas in an open landscape full of wonderful natural sound sources. and her relationship with nature will be a constant that will appear in works such as sonic meditation that you already mentioned, and will also determine his definition of deep listening, something she once defined as experiencing and expanded awareness of sound, silence, and sounding. Nowadays, it's very common to hear about sound environment, even sound ecology. What is the heritage of Oliveros in all of this?
One, and possibly the best way to answer your question, is to use an object from nature, in this case a shell, in the way that Pauline did. I was hoping to find some of these on the beach in San Sebastian, and perhaps one day I will. This is called a sea trumpet when the end is sawn off to make a mouthpiece. Oliveros's lifelong investigation into the process of listening to the environment continues to have a profound influence. She was committed to social as well as ecological environmentalism, the democratization of sounds as well as musical practices. Community could be cultivated in the imagination as well as reality through listening to sounds 2 kilometers away, beyond the hearing range. Through her sonic meditations and later deep listening pieces, Oliveros introduced the concept of incorporating all environmental sounds into musical performance. To make a pleasurable experience of this requires focused concentration and skilled musicianship. But Oliveros never lost interest in performing pieces with amateur musicians. Willowbrook Generations and Reflections from 1976 was written for a high school band. It shows Oliveros's interest in human information processing, instructions, interactions, and iterations. In the environment she creates in this piece, performers are either generators, led by 2 conductors, or reflectors, cued by a 3rd conductor, who sustain some of the tones produced by the generators. In this piece, the performers not only listen attentively to each other, but they also take cues from the conductors and from the musicians within and across the groups. Let us watch now a couple of minutes of the Vocal Constructivists performing this in the same concert in Cafe Otto that you heard the audio for Bye Bye Butterfly from.
Bring dong, bring dong.
Building on her interest in natural phenomena and human accessibility, Oliveros's rock piece from 1979 invites participants to choose a pair of resonant rocks to use as percussive instruments. After listening for environmental pulses, each participant is to establish an independent pulse with their rocks. The pulses maintain steadily without any rhythmic interpretation or accents. Participants who perceive that they are synchronizing exactly or in simple multiple or division by 2 or 3 of another participant's pulse should stop in order to listen and begin a new pulse that is independent in rate from all other pulses. From this piece, we learn that individuation depends on careful listening. Thinking about Oliveros's understanding of the relationship between ecology and sound invites consideration of a piece called In Consideration of the Earth from 1998. And you can see the score for this in the next slide. It is a text score that invites performers to play according to the feeling of the East, the South, the West, the North, and the Centre. The 4 points of the compass represented for Oliveros another kind of mandala. They also represent a philosophical viewpoint, with the necessity of passing through all the cardinal points before exploring the centre or self.
Okay, another of the particularities that surrounds Oliveros' work is, as you already mentioned also, her interest in technology, no? From her first electronic works to developing a piece in conversation with the moon, as you present, technological advances seem to interest the artist substantially, no? What can we conclude from this intersection, no, between this spiritual research or searching on the one hand and this faith or hope in technological progress, no, in the other?
In 1977, Pauline won a major prize honouring Beethoven in Bonn, Germany, the city of his birth, for a composition she called Bonfire, meaning celebration of Bonn. She adapted a piece called Link she had written for a campus or city in 1971. A large-scale performance piece, Bonfire or Link, involved creating slightly unusual experiences all over the city, the idea being to cast doubt on the difference between the real and the staged. With Pauline's instructions, the mayor of Bonn's assistant arranged for African drummers to appear at random times, fake moustaches to be handed out to lady shoppers, and school children to paint mandalas on manhole covers. The piece took place unannounced throughout the entire city of Bonn for a week. Oliveros admired Beethoven's music deeply. Recall her postcard theatre piece, Beethoven Was a Lesbian, with his bust lurking in her garden. Her love of puns lent itself well to her celebration of the city of Bonn that culminated in a bonfire, or, as she put it, a reasonable substitute for a bonfire. This environmental theatre piece challenged the notion of composition as a category apart. As the whole city or campus becomes a theatre or stage, all its inhabitants become performers. The goal is to concentrate attention on the natural sounds that exist in the environment. All of the normal activities that take place are part of the performance. If you are what Oliveros called knowing participants, you get to choose if you will notify those in your environment, your friends and family, etc., that they are now also participants, whatever they do. The intention of Bonfire, Oliveros wrote, is to gradually and subtly subvert perception so that normal activity seems as strange or displaced as any of the special activities. This attests to Oliveros' wish to cast an ever wider net, and it gives us some idea of her vision for network music making. Pauline's correspondence with her mother spanned 3 decades. Writing was more than a way to keep in touch. It offered a whole new kind of intimacy. In one of my letters to you, Pauline wrote in 1952, I said that I felt like we would grow closer in being apart, and now more than ever, I feel that it is true. I actually feel like I know you much better. Her mother is reported to have said, we're closer than people who live in the same house. Pauline got her mother a web TV in the 1990s so she could follow the deep listening discussion groups on the internet. And this gives us an example of ways in which we can stay connected in this challenging time. We are living through remote times presently, but can follow in Oliveros' footsteps to listen deeply, even in virtual spaces. As environmental and health reasons now compel us to join together remotely, we should remember Pauline's enthusiasm for broadcasting live concerts with musicians on different continents. Oliveros became a member of the Avatar Orchestra Metaverse shortly after it formed in March 2007 and continued to champion its activities until her passing. She was instrumental in 3 significant AOM works: her own Heart of Tones and Vancouver Calling, her multiple reality ability work made for performance by AOM in Second Life, and the deep listening AUMI, Adaptive Use Musical Interface Program. This is the software I referred to earlier that enables users to play sounds and musical phrases through movement and gestures. It is a way for improvisation that allows participants to express a range of affects by themselves or in response to others. While the AUMI interface can be used by anyone, the focus has been on working with children who have profound physical disabilities. Using her avatar Free Noise, Oliveros also welcomed the new year annually within Normal Lowry's environment Overnight for Dreaming Avatars in Second Life, as part of her partner Ion's annual Dream Festival. Oliveros encouraged her students and colleagues to investigate the potential in such networked platforms as a way to expand their listening and explore new contexts and possibilities for their work. Oliveros' belief in the possibilities of connection, of listening beyond the borders of place, culture, ability, language, skill, and genre pushed AOM and others beyond what people had thought possible. Her modeling of community, acceptance, love, and her tenacity in trying out challenging ideas have become norms of AOM and other groups. Oliveros said, "Deep listening represents a heightened state of awareness and connects to all that there is." Her wise words remind us that we are still able to create, share, plan, and make music, whatever our physical situation or limitations in 2021. As part of her 80th birthday celebration at the Experimental Media and Performing Arts Centre, also called MPAC, at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in 2012, Rensselaer's Architectural Acoustics program succeeded in digitally recreating the acoustic of the Fort Worden cistern in Washington State, which was the underground water tank made famous by the 1988 Deep Listening album. as we watch this excerpt from the performance in 2012, let us remember that the virtual is tangible.
So I guess this is the end of the conversation. Jane, I don't know if you want to add something or say something more. But anyway, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the talk, and I really enjoy. So
I've really enjoyed it as well, and I just put up a slide just in case people wanted to see details for my group. I hope that's not too opportunistic, but I do hope that we will have a chance to collaborate in person, but we might have a chance to collaborate virtually before then. And in any case, I look forward to continuing our conversations, but I'm wondering if there are other people who might want to take part in this conversation right now. I know that you have a chat. And I can't see the chat, but if you can, and if there are any questions in the chat, then we can see if we can answer them.
I'm very sorry to inform you, but the chat is not working, so we are not communicating with the public. This is sad, but so should be another time. And yes, I hope like this moment when we can meet physically is not so far, and we can continue with this conversation and everything, all the projects that we are talking about. So Jane, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure. And I just want to thank everybody at Tabakalera, particularly the technical help that I have had in getting ready for this conversation. There were a few little hiccups, as you saw, but nothing compared to what there would have been if we hadn't had such expert people in charge of this. So I think you're very fortunate to have such a great team there. And I am excited to see what you program in these months ahead, and how you continue to make all of this art and music accessible to what I hope is an ever-growing audience.
Thank you very much. Ciao.
Bye-bye then.